Very well, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And I think we have a lot of things we want to talk about, but I'll start us off with one question. I think the idea has been sold to us quite thoroughly on why Dalton McGuinty is maybe not the best premier, and maybe even why Tim Hudak is a good alternative.
Yeah.
But we're hoping to hear from you right now why Randall Denley specifically, and why Ottawa West Nepean specifically could benefit from both Randall and from Tim.
And Tim? You know, what we need is a really different approach to government. And it's certainly one I've advocated for years as a newspaper columnist. And our PC platform is very much in line with that. You know, we do have, well, I won't harp on Mr. McGuinty, you know his story, but whoever the next government is, they have to do something about the situation we're in. Extremely high spending, big tax increases, big deficits. And that's the problem that we face in Ontario the next 4 years. How do we get government back under control? You know, there's probably no stronger advocate of getting government back under control than me. I'm a spending watchdog kind of guy, as you know, bottom line kind of guy. And I wouldn't want to be part of a government that said, you know, 7% a year, don't worry about it. We'll just borrow the rest. That's just irresponsible, and it's really against the core conservative values. And what I always say to people is, the door is, you know, we all have to live within our means, right? So does government. You got to bring that sort of value to Queen's Park. You know, as a representative for Ottawa West Nepean, that's the value I'm going to bring. And I also think we need somebody who can speak very strongly for Ottawa and Queen's Park. We tend to be kind of forgotten down there. Somehow there's this idea that, well, you're a federal city, you're the capital, don't worry, we don't have to think about you. And it's particularly discouraging because we've had a premier from Ottawa, obviously, for the last 8 years. But we still don't seem to be anywhere near the top of the list versus Toronto. So Ottawa needs strong voices to make sure that the province's second largest city is heard from. I know I can do that. I've got a track record of being able to speak out for people, and I'm going to bring that as an MPP in Ottawa West Nepean. You know, the great thing about Tim Hudak is that he has a very strong belief in what we're going to do, and we're not promising to do anything we can't afford to do. What we actually need in the next 4 years is determination. And when we're talking about controlling government spending, that's not easy. But we have a plan to do it. We're determined to do it. The Liberals will put out the same numbers, and you know, in a very superficial analysis, people will say, well, your plan's the same as theirs, right? Well, the numbers are simple, but there's no plan for them. They just put out numbers. How do they get there? All they're doing in this election campaign is promising new programs and new types of spending. We aren't. We're next to no new spending. And we actually have a plan to cut back outside of health and education. Now, those are our priorities, obviously, and they're everybody's, right? But everything else, we're going to tighten that up 2% a year. That's critical. That's the big difference between ourselves and the Liberals. We're actually going to reduce spending on something in government for a change. And anybody who thinks you can't cut a government department by 2% has never spent too much time looking at government. There's an awful lot of waste. And as you guys know, there's more than 600 agencies in government, very unexamined, lots of places to look. Well, that's Tim's direction, and it's my direction. And I think that's really going to serve people in Ottawa West Nepean and right across the city very well.
Can you give an example of how Toronto has preferential treatment?
Well, when you look at the tech sector, for example, they put a lot of money into that, you know, Mars Innovative Center in Toronto. They put a lot of money into Waterloo. They've really put next to nothing into Ottawa. They just kind of forget about us. And when you look at transit, now, you know, the government has said, well, here's $600 million for transit. Fantastic, way to go. But that's only less than a third of the total cost. In Toronto, they're talking about 100% funding of projects. We don't have any 100% funding. And when you talk about that here, they just laugh. Well, you're Ottawa, take a third and be happy. Everybody needs to be treated the same, I think, when it comes to things like this. Don't 100% fund transit in Toronto, because it's important, and then say, well, I won't do it in Ottawa because it's not so important. A couple of examples right off the top.
So is it better to fund Toronto at a third or to fund both at 100%?
It's better to fund everybody at the same level, and I think, you know, the type of funding we have in Ottawa is all right if everybody's funded the same way. But I don't want to see a situation where Toronto's got a special plan and Ottawa's sort of back in the queue like we're not important. Do it one way or the other.
The $600 million Dalton said is firm,
yeah,
relying on, regardless of fluctuations.
Sure.
Would Tim Hudak approach that
yep.
differently?
No, absolutely the same. That money's there, it's committed to, we need it. Ottawa's moving forward with the project. I support it strongly. The money's definitely there.
But if through no fault of City Council it goes up 20%, can we expect that 600 envelope to go up 20%?
No. It's Ottawa's job to manage the project within the money that they've got. So, and I think that's quite achievable. It looks very promising that they're going to do that. And it's important to have a cap on it, because when you ask somebody to bid on a project like that, they need to know that that's as much money as you've got. You know, we need to do this work for 2.1, that's the deal. Figure out how to do it. If you can't do it, don't bid. But if you just say, well, it's kind of open-ended, what do you think it costs? Well, then it'll be at 2.5. So we need some discipline there in how much we're prepared to spend.
What do you think of the project, the Ottawa project?
You know, I think it's vastly superior to the previous Bob Shirley project. There's not much point in putting light rail downtown saying, it's okay for now, but you know, in 10 years we'll have to tear it all up. It's just a total waste of money to me. Mm-hmm. And the main part of that project was to reach out originally just to Riverside South, finally to Barrhaven. It does nothing for the east-west. You got to fix the downtown permanently, which this does. Mm-hmm. You got to start going east-west, which this does. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the right project. It's certainly one I've always advocated.
Okay, so you're okay with the tunnel. I know a lot of people for the tunnel, against the tunnel. You think the tunnel plan is...
Yeah, you know, I was originally skeptical of it because it's fairly expensive. Mm-hmm. But when you actually look at the details of this, you just can't move the volume on the surface that you can underground. And anything on the surface is going to be short-term. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be looking in a few years and say, why didn't we do a tunnel? Now we have to do one.
The RCMP just announced yesterday that they plan to have an online grow-up registry in which for a year properties will be listed. Does that undercut Tim Hudak's grow-up registry pledge?
Well, I don't think it undercuts it. I think it just shows how important it is. I mean, really, you know, the RCMP is on exactly the same page as we are, that people should have a right to this information. You know, if you're buying a house, you should have that information in front of you. Because, you know, somebody will come in, do a quick and dirty fix-up, all the mold's still in the walls, somebody buys a house, didn't know. This puts it out there so it's publicly available. And I think it's great that an organization as credible as the RCMP is jumping in to do this, and it's exactly what we suggested.
If the RCMP and the OPP both do it, that is duplication of services, though.
I don't know exactly what information the RCMP has and how that might differ from the OPP. There's certainly a lot of other police agencies involved in marijuana enforcement besides just the RCMP. So, you know, you'd have to look at the details of that, I guess, to see whether there's any gaps. But ultimately, you would expect all the police services to work together to provide, you know, a comprehensive list. But I think it gives a lot of credibility to what we suggested.
On the topic of working together, when it comes to the LRT, different levels of government have had a say. The NCC has made quite unequivocal statements about where it wants to see it go.
Yeah.
What sort of direction should the province get behind, even on specifics, whether it's down Carling or on the Parkway, those sort of things?
Yeah, you know, I think the critical thing there is that the city is doing an environmental assessment. That's going to tell us how those different alternatives rank, what they really cost. It's got to come in there somewhere. What are the pluses and minuses? You know, I know the city's first instinct was to, you know, run it through on the River Parkway. It hasn't exactly been met with a great deal of local enthusiasm or NCC enthusiasm. They can't force the NCC to do anything. Obviously going to have to look carefully at Carling. There's certainly a case to be made for Carling, but I think, you know, we need to have that case in front of us and say, what will it cost on Carling? What does it cost on the Ottawa River Parkway? What are the costs? What are the benefits? That's how I prefer to look at any kind of an issue, is to, you know, link the costs and the benefits rather than just look at one or the other. So many things are just sold, it seems, strictly on the perceived benefits, forget about the cost, or they're rejected on the cost, don't worry about the benefits. I always got to put those two together for me.
On the matter of agencies and boards, an NDP candidate was telling me yesterday that he thinks that we should be abolishing the OMB. Would you support something like that?
No, it's just it's a knee-jerk reaction, and people often misunderstand what the OMB is all about. You know, it's a court of appeal, in effect, not just for developers, but for citizens. It's a way to prevent the city from taking arbitrary action that goes against its own policies. That's why things end up at the OMB, because people believe they have taken action against their own policies. There needs to be some kind of recourse. At least at the OMB, you've got a member who's got typically a substantial background in this kind of stuff. If you didn't have the OMB, people would just be going to court instead. It would cost more money, and you're in front of a judge who says, what do I know about planning? So let's put it in front of a planning expert. And when people lose at the OMB, it's typically because they're on the wrong side of the planning rules, whether it's the city or a person. But I think it's a critical safety valve that prevents government from breaking its own rules.
On the note of culling commissions, I know you've identified the LINS, the Ontario Power Authority. What about the Ontario Human Rights Commission?
No, we're going to keep that, and we've been clear on that. We're going to keep it, but it doesn't work very well. That's the problem with it. There are people who have legitimate problems that should be dealt with by a Human Rights Commission, but unfortunately, the way it runs now is a huge backlog because every trivial problem comes there and it gets in the queue. If you run it properly, it runs under typical rules of evidence and law. There's going to be a weeding out up front. If somebody's got a complaint that's obviously frivolous, there's just no evidence to go forward with it, it's dismissed out of hand. But that way you deal with the legitimate complaints much more effectively. If somebody actually has a complaint, you can't really say to them, well, we'll get back to you in a year or two. You have to deal with it a little more expeditiously than that, and that's what we're going to do.
And he says the LINS are going to be, he's going to get rid of the LINS, but he has no plan after that.
Yeah. Okay,
What do you say to that?
Let me be clear about the LINS. And I've been a LINS skeptic from day one, long before I ever got into provincial politics. The trouble with the LINS is they create an impression of local control without actually providing any local control. The province appoints the board. They're responsible to the province. They're not responsible to you and I or the people in Ottawa, West Nepean. They just do what the province tells them, basically. The only money they have to spend is the money the province gives them. And all it is everybody's budget stapled together. I got a lot of respect for Alex Munter. I think he's doing the best job he can under the circumstances he works under. But if Alex thinks, we need to spend $1 million more here on this urgent need, he's got to go around and beg and persuade somebody to give up some money and somebody else to give up some money to pull together that $1 million to get something done. It's very cumbersome, very slow, and it really doesn't accomplish anything. These LINS cost about $70 million. And one thing that's been crystal clear to me, meeting people in the last number of months, is we need to spend on health care. A lot of needs not being met. It's not satisfactory to me to spend $70 million on pure bureaucracy that doesn't provide 10 cents of health care when there's so many needs unmet. So we're going to get rid of them, put the $70 million back into frontline health care. Now you get to part two of your question, what do you do next? I think this is an important principle here. The provincial government is responsible for health care. That's why they elect, hopefully, people like me to do that. I'm responsible. It's up to us to deliver the goods and to be responsible for it. We raise the taxes. You got a group like the LIN, they don't raise any taxes. They're not responsible. They're just a way for the minister to deflect blame and say, well, don't ask me, talk to the LIN. I gave them lots of money. I don't know why there's not enough money for this man. Talk to the LIN. It's the health minister and the health ministry have to be responsible for health care. And I think that we need someone in Ottawa who understands our particular needs, who the players are, how to make progress, but also has the authority to get things done. I'm thinking something along the lines of an assistant deputy minister responsible for what's now the Champlain LIN. Somebody who actually is our top Eastern Ontario health guy, who's got a pipeline through to the deputy and the minister and says, look, I've talked to people here, we need to move the $1 million. I'm responsible for the Eastern Ontario budget, I'm moving the $1 million. It doesn't have to be the result of years of negotiation. We need to act, we don't need to talk about acting. So that's where I see us going with the LINS.
Okay, so I live in your riding.
Yep.
And you're asking me to vote for you.
Yep.
What does my family have at the end of the day that they don't have now from the Conservatives?
Yeah. Two things. Short answer, more money in your pocket. We're going to cut your income tax by 5%. We're going to take 8% off your power and your home heating. Get rid of that provincial part of the HST. The PCs fought that very hard, and I agree to impose a tax like that on a big ticket essential was unfair and really badly timed in a recession to say to people, well, yeah, here's a big new tax you have to pay. That's a lot of money out of people's pockets. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to get rid of the debt retirement charge. and we're going to let people make their own choice about time of use meters. To me, this is the consumer choice. You don't need the Premier of Ontario to tell you, when to use your power. So we're going to give people that choice in that area. We're going to guarantee that we're going to get the job done in healthcare and education. Those are our priorities. And I mentioned earlier how we're going to do that by squeezing other things in a little bit. If you're going to set priorities, you have to do that. So you're going to have lower power bills, you're going to have more money back in your pocket, and you're going to have a government that respects the money that we get from you, lives within its means. That's probably the single biggest difference between what we intend to do and what the Liberals have been doing for 8 years. They don't live within their means, and they don't particularly care. I mean, these are guys who will promise anything to anybody. They don't worry about how to pay for it because they know they can still go to the bank and borrow some more. It's just irresponsible, and we're piling up a big debt for the next generation, and we're also spending billions of dollars more in interest. If you look at the next 4 years, because of the Liberals and their huge deficit that they've gotten us into and the big debt that they've accumulated, we're going to be spending about $4 billion more 4 years from now on interest. You could provide an awful lot of service to Ontarians for $4 billion. We've got to get out of the hole. Our plan would take us more than halfway there. So I think you're going to have government that's going to control spending so you don't have to worry about tax increases. You don't have to worry about new taxes. Now, somebody has to tighten their belt in the next 4 years, right? And I met so many people going door to door. Their belts are about as tight as they're ever going to get. I don't know how government can turn around to, the 85-year-old widow trying to stay in her own home. There's a lot of them in our riding. Say, well, ma'am, you're going to have to tighten your belt. We've got some wonderful new ideas. We're going to spend some money to help you plug in your electric car at the mall, $80 million. So we need a little more from you. It's not even at all important to people. You've got to focus on what matters to people.
Would a conservative government remove those new items from the HST? Like haircuts and stuff like that? That originally weren't taxed.
Well, they excluded essentials like newspapers. I mean, what do you want?
No, but you know what I mean? Like some people were more upset that something that they didn't have to pay tax on, now they were with a combined.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And, when that issue was looked at by the policy guys, the feeling was, how do you deal with this? Give people some real relief without just starting to unravel the whole thing. The home heating and the power were the two biggest ticket items that we could do something about. Mm-hmm. So we thought, let's keep it simple. We'll do those two things, put as much money as we can back in the easiest way. But once you start to, get into cascading stuff, where do you stop, right? It's annoying to people to pay HST on things that they didn't used to have to pay the two taxes on. And I totally get that, but for us it's a balance, like everything else we're talking about. You got to remember how big the deficit is. We're $16 billion in the hole this year alone. We can't afford to give up too much tax revenue, but we thought that the way we targeted it does provide a clear and useful release to people. We love to take the whole thing apart, but you just can't do it. And
it makes me wonder, am I going to see it when you're next Premier and you're in cabinet, and how's that working out for you?
Yeah, well, it's really a different thing when you decide to run for a political party. I've never been a partisan guy. I've never been a political party guy, obviously, as a journalist. And your analogy was a good one. You are a soloist, and you have the privilege of writing your own music, basically, in that case. But this is an orchestra now. It's a team. We have a plan. I think it's a great plan. If I didn't think it was a great plan, I wouldn't be running. So I'm happy to sell our plan. And it's actually a big job to explain to people the things that we're going to do. I think they're good things that are in sync with what I've been calling for years. So I'm happy to get out and sell them. There isn't really any sort of dissonance there on the main points. I think when I deal with the media, I answer questions. I speak as me. And, I'm not going to be a different guy after October 6th, let's put it that way.
I think Sherry Franklin tried to argue that there's a huge dissonance and that you just don't like the community that you're running in. How do you respond to that?
I thought that was such a peculiar thing to say. I don't know whether that's what Sherry thinks or what Andy Hayden thinks or whether it comes from the Bob Shirelli campaign or where it really originates from. But I've lived in Nepean for 28 years. I worked in Nepean for 28 years, Ottawa, West Nepean. If I didn't like Nepean, I wouldn't live there. I lived in 4 different houses in Nepean. I've written some columns over the years, probably critical of everything under the sun. And some of what they were referring to was about, suburban sprawl. In some parts, not actually in Ottawa, West Nepean, but the very southern parts of Nepean are an example of the kind of suburban sprawl that we should do something about. But to jump from that to say, oh, I don't like Nepean, it's just a collapse of logic there. It's just, somebody who's playing on another team. Sherry nominated Bob Shirelli, so I don't see the apple falling too far from the tree here. Somebody's playing on another team, and they're trying to find a way to create a controversy. I guess the only thing that surprised me about it was that people thought it was a news story. To me, that was a letter to the editor.
The candidates have been trying to tell me that intensification is outpricing low-income families from downtown Ottawa, or that it might. That's what they're afraid of, and that the province has a clear role to play in stemming that and in creating social housing units. Andrew Horvath has 50,000. As you know, there's about 10,000 people.
I guess if you thought government should solve every problem, that would make perfect sense, but I probably can't afford to live downtown. I'm not sure why we think low-income families should afford to live downtown. There's a reason why a lot of families live in South Nepean, because it's affordable, right? You can see a lot of people who sneer at the suburbs and say, oh, why do people make that choice? Because that's what they can afford. They got a decent school, they got a bit of a backyard, a house they can afford to buy. That's why they live there. But you're not going to replicate that downtown. The land prices are just too high. There's a reason why downtown redevelopment is mostly big condo buildings, small units, very expensive. I mean, a lot of countries, people, families live in those kind of units. It's very European. That's a choice they can make. But if a family wants a little bit bigger house, maybe 3 bedrooms, downtown's not affordable. Well, that's just economics. I don't think it's up to government to step in and reverse economics or attempt to do it at somebody else's expense.
I just wanted to follow up on that common sense thing, and sorry to keep bringing it up because probably a lot of people in Ontario would like to see it go away. I was not one of them. I was sort of supporter of that. You said that you felt comfortable taking that platform in front of you there to the door. So am I to guess from that you wouldn't have been as comfortable in a common sense revolution?
Well, I think
sort of revolution, I guess is what we're saying.
I think what Mike Harris suggested at the time was right for the time.
Right.
We're coming out of an NDP government that was basically just totally out of control, and people wanted to bring in somebody who was going to dramatically change things, get control of things, get away from a pro-union style government. That's what they wanted. That's what they gave him. That's why he was elected. People tend to forget that Mike Harris was re-elected too. If you listen to the tale told, it gets bigger every time you hear it now. But you think he was the worst man in history. But people re-elected him because he did what he said he was going to do.